If you're wondering why the thumbnail for today's episode is titled, How to Be Convincing When It Makes Zero Sense, you're not alone. Because in this episode, we plunge into a startling real-life story that challenges the very essence of reason and logic. We deep dive in lengths one might go to claim someone else's identity. Gather round, ladies and gentlemen, as we begin this eerie audio journey. Buckle up for an unforgettable odyssey into a world where sound paints stories. As we delve into episode 2, we start by asking, have you ever stopped to wonder how well you truly know someone? Could you be sharing your life with an absolute stranger without the faintest inkling? Let's probe into a truly unnerving story. Meet Frédéric Bourdin, the man whose notorious claim to fame is adopting the identity of a missing American boy named Nicholas Barkley. In the depths of Texas, a family was shattered when their 13-year-old son Nicholas vanished without a trace. 3 agonizing years of hope and dread passed with no answers, until a haunting call from Spain reverberated in their lives. Nicholas had been found, alive. Or had he? Young Nicholas Barkley disappeared from his home in San Antonio, Texas on June 13, 1994. He had last been seen playing basketball with his friends, residing with his mother, Beverly Dollarhide, and his older brother, Jason. Nicholas was not the face you'd find on a milk carton or the centerpiece of emotional headlines. He had a history of troubles and was described as streetwise by his sister Carrie. On the day of his disappearance, Nicholas phoned his brother Jason for a ride home after his basketball game, but was told to walk. This was the last time anyone saw Nicholas. 3 years later, in 1997, his picture caught the eye of a serial conman in police custody in Spain. A seemingly young, frightened boy was found near a train station around 200 miles south of Madrid, unwilling to reveal his identity. But all was not as it seemed. The terrified figure was not a teenager, but a 23-year-old French national with a grim past of stealing and creating identities. Frédéric Bourdin, the man behind the deception, was no ordinary individual. Frédéric Pierre Bourdin had a lengthy rap sheet and feared fingerprinting and prison if he didn't give Spanish authorities answers. So he came up with a new story, telling authorities he was American and had run away from home. He convinced local police in Linares to let him stay in an office overnight and begged them to be allowed to contact his family himself. Bourdin did not phone his relatives, though instead he called American police stations. He pretended to be an officer himself, saying an American teen had turned up in Spain and was believed to be missing. Eventually, Bourdin was given the number for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which raised Nicholas Barkley as a possible match, faxing over a photo of the teen from several years earlier. Bourdin saw the photo and leapt at the opportunity, buoyed by the knowledge that Nicholas had been missing for years, and so his appearance had likely changed. Bourdin took Nicholas's identity and was flown to the US. In The Imposter, Bourdin coldly said, "If there is a change, there is doubt. If there is doubt, then I've got a chance." Something in my head decided that I could do it, that I had to try. In order to make the story convincing, Bourdin dyed his hair blonde and had another young girl in custody tattoo him with markings to match Nicholas's ink. Despite having brown eyes and a French accent, the experienced con man convinced the family he was their blue-eyed son, claiming to have escaped a child prostitution ring that had altered his eye color. He had managed to pull the wool over the eyes of almost everyone involved, including Nicholas's older sister, who flew to Spain to bring him home. But Bourdin didn't convince everyone. His most audacious act of deception came when he assumed the identity of a missing American teenager, Nicholas Barkley. Bourdin, a 30-year-old man at the time, managed to convince an entire family and even the authorities that he was their long-lost son. When news broke of the seemingly impossible story, PI Charlie Parker visited Nicholas's family home with a TV crew in late 1997. But something didn't seem right. He described Bourdin as creepy, telling The Independent, "I just sat in the chair, and I was fortunate enough that there was a picture on the right there of the real Nicholas Barkley. And he had bluish-grey eyes, and it didn't gel." Then an idea occurred to Mr. Parker. He asked the TV producer to zoom in on the ears of the person sat in front of them. He explained that ears are a distinctive way in which people can be identified. Recalling the experience, he said, "What happened is that immediately I knew that I had an imposter, right off the bat. And so I was argumentative with everybody, and I got in a little trouble with the FBI. They thought he was who he said he was. That's when they gave me too much heat. They said, "You're going down the wrong path," and they threatened me with obstruction of justice. So I came home, I met with my wife, I showed her the ears, I showed all this stuff, and I said, "Honey, we've got to go for it. We know this is not the guy." And it was the biggest case I would ever have. Mr. Parker called and spoke to Nicholas's mother, but Bourdin called him back, arguing the detective was wrong, and US authorities had already issued him a passport since they were so sure in their belief that he was Nicholas. Mr. Parker recalled saying, "I know one thing, you're not Nicholas Barkley, and I'm going to stay with you." So began a lengthy stint of covert surveillance before switching to overt surveillance in an attempt to dial up the pressure on Bourdin, to let him know his every move was being watched. After confronting Mr. Parker about being watched, Bourdin began to call him. Mr. Parker said he thought what happened was that Bourdin was finding out that there wouldn't be any return of Nicholas Barkley, and he was starting to get scared himself. So, an unlikely relationship began to form. The pair met weekly for hotcakes and to talk, with Mr. Parker pressing the then unidentified man for information. Then, one day in March 1998, he confessed. "My name is Frédéric Bourdin," he told Mr. Parker, "and I'm wanted by Interpol." Mr. Parker's wife was waiting down the road with the detective's gun, and law enforcement was on the edge of their seat waiting for answers. In the documentary, Bourdin explains he admitted the fraud as he felt some people close to Nicholas knew that he was an imposter and were only carrying on with his deceit as they were sure that the missing boy was dead. Nicholas's devastated family members have always maintained they have no idea what happened to Nicholas. In September 1998, Bourdin pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury in a San Antonio federal court. But Nicholas's older brother Jason died of a drug overdose shortly after Bourdin's arrest, and before he was sentenced. Bourdin was imprisoned for 6 years, more than twice as long as recommended in sentencing guidelines, but that wasn't the end of Bourdin's fraudulent ways. He was returned to France in 2003 and moved to Grenoble, where he assumed the identity of Léo Ballet, a 14-year-old French boy who had been missing since 1996. Bourdin claims to have assumed at least 500 false identities in his life, saying it's due to a need for love and attention he allegedly did not receive as a child. Director of The Imposter, Bart Layton, brought the fraudster to London to interview him for the documentary, released in 2012, and spent the day with him. But he realized, as Bourdin was on the train back across the channel, that he too had been conned. After I walked away, having heard him tell his story, I remember feeling really deeply sorry for him. Feeling really like, poor guy. He never had a childhood, he told The Independent. You know, maybe he was justified in trying to sort of steal one back, kind of thing. And then, I sort of remember stopping in my tracks in King's Cross Station and thinking, wow, I've just been conned. He's just done to me exactly what he's done to everyone, which is to tell this very sympathy-inducing sob story. That was the moment when I realized, that's how to make the film. To allow him to do to the audience exactly what he has done. So it seemed to me like a very different way of trying to make that film and tell that story. Because it seemed that the story was so outlandish and so wildly far-fetched that, unless you really experienced him doing to you, the viewer, what he did to everyone that he came into contact with, you would really struggle to understand how he managed to do what he did. As our audio adventure draws to an end, we extend our gratitude for your presence. Until next time, may your adventure be as grand as your imagination. Stay curious, my friends.